Welcome to the Pulse of Miami Church. I think everybody's been here before. In case you forgot, my name is Todd Peterson, and I'm the lead pastor here at this church. And before we get into this week's sermon, I need to address the scandal that happened last week. Okay? The scandal that happened last week was up on the screen. It said motivation maters. Now the actual point of the sermon was motivation matters, but apparently I didn't know how to spell. Okay, and so we're actually calling it Matergate. So whoever refer to it, it's Matergate. I knew right after sermon, okay, that there was a problem because Wesley came up with Jen. Okay. If Wesley's coming up to congratulate me and say, hey, that was a good sermon, it spoke to me, great. Jen never says that. So if Jen is coming, it's because she's going to make fun of something that I did horribly wrong. And so that happened. But I have a lot of respect for them. They came and told me. The rest of you guys just sat here like everything was normal, right? So anyway, I appreciate them. Thank you guys very much for embarrassing me and making me feel horrible. In fact, I went home later that week. My dad sits down with me and he's like, son, did you realize that you misspelled matters on the screen? I'm like, yeah, Dad, I did. I thought I taught you how to spell, son. Didn't you go to college? And I'm like, Dad, here's my sermon notes. I had to show him my sermon notes just so I knew that I knew how to spell matters. Anyway.
He doesn't matter, it's okay.
He's a mater. He didn't show up today, so he's a mater. So today we're actually going to continue into a different scandal. Okay, last week I told you that it was the finale about David because it was the end of 2 Samuel. Okay, but I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't like the way that we closed out the study of David. Right, the census and people dying. That's not really. I feel like David deserves more from us, right? Than to close it out on this because this is the David and Goliath. This is the greatest king that would ever live on the face of the planet, basically. I feel like he needs to close out a little bit better than 2 Samuel chapter 24. In fact, there was another author that authored another book called Chronicles that actually tells a lot of the same stories that you find in 1 and 2 Samuel. They agreed with me. And they actually closed out the story of David a little bit different and on a positive note. So if you will allow me to, I'm extending our 2 Samuel study just a little bit further so that we can close this thing out on a positive note. Okay? So we're going to be looking at the end of 1 Chronicles. That would be 1 Chronicles 28 and 29 today. And the question that I want us to ask, though, and this is I'm excited about this one, is how do we maintain a healthy relationship with money? And this is what we're going to find in this passage with David, is he actually had a really, really healthy relationship with money. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you. The Bible has a lot to say about having a healthy relationship with money. You guys probably remember a few passages. In fact, I'm going to start them, see if you can finish them. Right? For the love of money is
the root of all kinds of evil.
For the root of all kinds of evil, right? A servant cannot serve two masters, right? He will either love the one or hate the other, or the other way around. You cannot serve both God and
Mammon.
Money. You cannot serve both God and money. And these are just a couple verses. There's verses all over Scripture that warn us about having an unhealthy relationship with money. Now, you might be sitting here today going, I can't possibly have an unhealthy relationship with money because I don't have any money, right? And so you might be sitting here thinking to yourself, this sermon is for somebody else. Michelle and I'm going to tell you, our testimony is that we thought that we had a really good relationship with money until a tragedy showed us that for years we did not have a healthy relationship with money. And so today I want us to ask the question, how do we maintain a healthy relationship with money? Really, really interesting passage. And I think that if you take this to heart, it may change the way that you look at a lot of things. So we're going to open up to 1 Chronicles chapter 28. Now you remember that David is a man after God's own heart. And you remember, David was very passionate about worshiping Yahweh. In fact, he wanted to move the Ark of the Covenant. Remember, he wanted to move it into Jerusalem. And there was that whole scandal where they were moving it on a cart, and the oxen stumbled, and Uzzah reached out his hand to keep it on there, and he touched the Ark of the Covenant, and he died. Remember that? And you remember that finally when David came into Jerusalem, he was so excited, he put on a priestly robe instead of a kingly robe, and his wife was like, oh, you're so despicable. And he says, oh, well, if you think that I'm disgraceful now, you haven't seen nothing yet. I'm gonna disgrace myself within the worship of God. Like, I love God so much. Okay? Well, one of the things that David wanted to do is he wanted to build a temple for Yahweh. He wanted to build a temple for God. But God wouldn't let him. 1 Chronicles chapter 28, starting in verse 2. David gets up and he's talking to the people, but he's describing to them a conversation that he had with God. Then King David rose to his feet and said, "Hear me, my brothers and my people. I had it in my heart to build a house for the rest of the build a house of rest for the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh and for the footstool of our God, and I made preparations for building it." Okay? Something interesting here that I wanted to point out. The Ark, you remember the Ark, if you saw Indiana Jones and
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? That's the first one. Man, you're not batting 1,000 today. So that ark is actually considered God's footstool. Okay? It's where God rests his feet. I want you to think about the significance of that. This is where the God of the universe rests. This is where he puts his feet up. That was why the nation of Israel was so special, because this is where the God of the universe relaxes, kicks off his shoes. This is where the presence, the very holy presence of God was. Okay? And so what David wanted to do is, David's sitting in his home. He's got this huge palace. And he looks out and he sees that the place where we worship God is a tent. It's not right that I'm living in a palace and God's presence is in a tent. And so basically what he wanted to do is he wanted to create an even bigger palace for the real king. Verse 3, he says, "But God said to me, you may not build a house for my name, for you are a man of war and have shed blood." And that's true. David had, with his own two hands, he had killed a lot of people. Now, I've always had a problem with this passage because it's like, but God, you were the one who told David to do it. God, you were the one who told him to go kill Goliath. You were the one that told him to go against the Philistines. And David was a cool king because he wasn't just like, all right, you guys go fight. Like, he was out there fighting with the people. He was an amazing king. But I thought about it for a second, and I started thinking about like a modern context. Imagine if somebody came to our church who was a prison guard, right? And let's say, everybody's welcome here. Maybe we find out he's a good guy, but over time, kind of getting to know him, he's not just any prison guard. He's the one in charge of death row. And imagine he's the one who gives the guy his last meal, straps him into the chair, presses the button. Like, could you imagine, like, that guy coming to our church? Now, maybe he's a good guy, and it's okay that he's here. But could you imagine if that guy came up to me and was like, "Hey, Todd, would you mind if I helped out with children's ministry?" It would be kind of weird, right? And in the same way, and maybe he's doing all the right things that he's supposed to do. In the same way, even though David may have done exactly what Yahweh wanted him to do, building the temple was building the holiest place on the face of the planet. This is a place where God was going to put his feet up. And God says, David, you're not the man for it. Right? And I'm sure that really bummed David out. But in verse 4, he says, "Yet Yahweh, the God of Israel, chose me from all of my father's house to be king over Israel forever. For he chose Judah, my tribe, as leader, and in the house of Judah, my father's house, and among my father's sons, he took pleasure in me to make me king over all of Israel. So I can't be bitter about the fact that he won't allow me to build his house. Verse 5. And of all my sons, for Yahweh has given me many sons, he has chosen Solomon, my son, to sit on the throne of the kingdom of Yahweh over Israel. This is David's announcement. David's an old man at this point. My son Solomon, he's going to be the next king over Israel. I've got other sons. I've got sons that are older than him. But Yahweh has chosen him to be the next king. Verse 6. And he, meaning God, said to me, it is Solomon your son who shall build my house and my courts, for I have chosen him to be my son, and I will be his father. And so, essentially, David was rejected. No, you can't build the temple. The temple will be built by Solomon, my son. Now, I want you to think of it this way. David was kind of the blue-collar king. He was the one who got in and he got his hands dirty, right? Like he built the kingdom. Solomon was more of a white-collar king. Solomon did the things that David couldn't. He kind of thought about things from more of a white-collar perspective, and he was able to kind of think about the bigger picture. And so he was able to take the kingdom of God, or the kingdom of Israel, to a bigger place than David ever could have. And so there was a time and a place for each one of them. Finally, it says in verse 7, I will establish his kingdom forever if he continues to be strong in keeping my commandments and my rules as he is today. And so essentially, God is going to be over Solomon as he builds the temple. Now the rest of chapter 28, David goes up to God and says, well, I can't build the temple, but can I make the plans? God's like, go for it. So he makes all the plans, right? He has it all drawn up, and he has the engineers and the architects work on it. And then he even comes up with a plan on how each of the priests is going to do their duty and how long and like he did all the plans. And then he goes back up to Yahweh and he says, hey, Yahweh, I can't build it, but I can plan it. Can I fund it? Can I do a fundraiser for it? God's like, yeah, go for it. And so he does. And so on this day, 1 Chronicles chapter 29, he actually invites everybody to give to the building of the temple. In verse 6. Then the leaders of the fathers' houses made their free will offerings, as did also the leaders of the tribes, the commanders of the thousands and of the hundreds, and the officers over the king's work. And so everybody, from the guy who used to dig the ditches to the people who were commanders in the armies, they all got to give to this project. Notice how it says free will offering. They weren't taxed for this. They weren't forced to participate. Everybody who gave because they wanted to give. They wanted to be a part of this. It's interesting. Look at how much they gave. Verse 7. They gave for the service of the house of God 5,000 talents and 10,000 derricks of gold. Do you know how much a talent is? A talent isn't like a coin. A talent is a bag of gold. 5,000 bags of gold. David had already given 3,000 bags of gold from his own personal wealth. And he gave silver and all kinds of stuff. They also gave silver, 10,000 talents of silver, 10,000 bags of silver, and 18,000 talents of bronze, and 100,000 talents of iron. So the people donated all this stuff so that they could build the temple. Verse 8, and whoever had precious stones gave them to the treasury of the house of Yahweh in the care of Jehiel the Gershonite. And they would either use these as part of the decoration of the temple, or they would sell them and use that to buy more supplies. Verse 9, then the people rejoiced because they had given willingly. With a whole heart they had offered freely to Yahweh. And David, the king, also rejoiced greatly. And so they were very proud of the money that they had given. And so then David does this prayer. And what's interesting, this prayer is fascinating to me. He's praying over this money. And in the middle of the prayer, he has this realization about money. Watch. Verse 10. Therefore David blessed Yahweh in the presence of all the assembly. And David said, Blessed are you, O Yahweh, the God of Israel, our Father, forever and ever. And so he starts talking about Yahweh. Verse 11, Yours, O Lord, or yours, O Yahweh, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty. For all that is in the heavens and the earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, O Yahweh. And you are exalted as head above all. You are so amazing, Yahweh. And so you notice how he's praising him and praising him. And then, in verse 12, he says, Both riches and honor come from you, and you rule over all. So all riches and honor come from you. In your hand are power and might, and in your hand it is to make great and to give strength to all. Any money that anybody has, any wealth that anybody has, it comes from you, God. Yeah, they had to work for it. But ultimately, you are the one who gave them the opportunities. Verse 13, he says, And now we thank you, our God, and we praise your glorious name. And then it hits him. Wait a minute. Wait. Right in the middle of the prayer. If everything comes from God, then this money that we gave to him is our key verse. Verse 14 he goes, But who am I? And what is, or who are my people, that we should be able thus to offer willingly? For all things come from you, and of your own we have given to you. In other words, we can't take credit for the offering because all of our money comes from him to begin with. Right? We can't even take credit for this. And the funny thing is that you would think that it would make your heart kind of sink. Oh, I was very proud of this. Now, but he actually gets even more excited about it. Verse 15, he says, For we are strangers before you and sojourners, as all of our fathers were. Our days on earth are like a shadow, and there is no abiding. We're nobody. He says that we're sojourners. Remember that all the other nations, they had their land, but Israel was the one that was kind of born from God. Right? God, through a miracle, Abraham and Sarah, in their old age, were able to have a child. And that was the birth of their nation. And so it was actually literally a miracle that they were even there. And they were sojourners in other people's lands. He's like, we're nobody. Verse 16, he says, But O Yahweh our God, all this abundance that we have provided for building you a house for your holy name comes from your hand, and it is all your own. David was like, man, I thought we had given this to you, but now that I think about it, you had already given us everything to begin with, and so we really didn't give you anything. This is what we owe to you. And then he says in verse 17, he says, I know, my God, that you test the heart and have pleasure in uprightness. In the uprightness of my heart I have freely offered these things. And now I have seen your people who are present here offering freely and joyously to you. At the end of the day, he says, man, I realize now it's not about the money. It's about my heart. And it's about the people's heart. You know, God, you know that we could have been greedy and tried to keep all this for ourselves, but the only thing that we have to offer you, it's not the money. The money already belonged to you. But it's our heart that we're offering to you. What an interesting way of thinking about money. Verse 19. He says, grant to Solomon... I'm sorry, let me go back. Verse 18. O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, our fathers, keep forever such purposes and thoughts in the hearts of your people, and direct their hearts toward you. Now, if we know the story of the history of Israel, they didn't always keep this heart, did they? Malachi 3:10, they all talk about, oh man, we've been robbing God because, we refuse to give to him. We've been greedy. So that happens later. But David has this little picture of heaven. It's like, wow, this is amazing. Verse 19, he says, grant to Solomon my son a whole heart that he may keep your commandments, your testimonies, and your statutes, performing all, and that he may build the palace for which I have made a provision. God, please bless my son, and may my son continue to have this kind of a heart so that he could build you a palace. Lord God, you deserve a palace. Verse 20, then David said to all the assembly, bless Yahweh your God. And all the people of the assembly blessed Yahweh, the God of their fathers, and bowed their heads and paid homage to Yahweh and to the king. I don't know about you guys. That's the way we need to end the story of King David, right? David, a man after God's own heart. And David teaches us something really interesting. How do we maintain a healthy relationship with money? David didn't always have a healthy relationship with money, right? But in this moment he did. Why? Because he realized that it all belongs to him. It all belongs to God. David realized in that moment, this doesn't even belong to me. And if we were to remember that, if we remember that everything that we have ultimately belongs to God, we will begin to develop a healthy relationship with money. I want you to think about how the Bible repeatedly warns against having an unhealthy relationship with money. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Well, are you going to have the love of money if you realize that it all belongs to him? No, that's never going to happen to you if you realize that it all belongs to him. A servant cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and money. But if from the very beginning you always went, oh, well, it all belongs to him anyway, it can never become your master. And so what I want you to do is think about the consequences of an unhealthy relationship with money. I think a lot of us think that that has to do with rich people. But an unhealthy relationship with money can also look like getting over your head in debt, in consumer debt. And the truth of the matter is that there's a lot of people that are struggling with that. What happens if we have an unhealthy relationship with money and we get over our head in debt? Well, in Jesus' time, you know that in Jesus' time, sometimes they would get over their head in debt too. It was just harder to get in debt back then. Now it's easy. Because you just take a little card out of your wallet and all of a sudden now you're in debt. Right? Like it's that easy. Back then you actually had to go to somebody and you had to ask them. But people back in Jesus' time would get over their heads in debt. And you know what would happen if they couldn't pay it off? They would have to sell themselves and their family into slavery in order to pay it off. And here's what's fascinating about that, right? If you think about today, don't we oftentimes have to sell ourselves into slavery in order to pay off our debts? How many of us can't stand our jobs, but we can't take the time off to go look for another job because the debt collector keeps calling? You see, if we would have, from the very beginning, if we start realizing that it all belongs to Him, we don't get ourselves into that situation to begin with. And what happens when we get in over our head in debt? Well, we're not able to tithe. We're not able to give to the Lord. We're not able to do the same thing that David was able to do here. And then, let me tell you something. If you can't tithe, man, watch out. Because what happens when you can't tithe is what's right after that is you can't pay your car payment. One of my favorite things to do on YouTube Shorts, there's a couple channels where repo guys will actually put like video cameras like on the back of their truck. I just find it fascinating. I don't know why. They just like in the middle of the night, and pick up the car. But then you always have like these people running out after the car, and then they get in, and then they try to drive the car off, and they like rip the bumper off. It's fascinating stuff. Right. Like if you don't, it's kind of like trash TV, but it's fun, right? You just got to watch it. But here's the thing that I figured out. 99.99999% of the people who that's happening to have an unhealthy relationship with money. But yet when they come out, they blame everything on the tow truck driver doing their job. But really, they had the unhealthy relationship with money because they didn't realize from the beginning, hey, wait a minute, it all belongs to him. If you can't pay your tithe, and then you can't pay your car payment, then what's next? The rent, mortgage. Then you get desperate. And you know what happens when you get desperate? You end up doing things that you never thought you would do. Stuff that you swore you would never do. And you get desperate. And it all starts with an unhealthy relationship with money. I've known good pastors that became pastors for good reasons. They had an unhealthy relationship with money and they got desperate and they embezzled money from the church. I've known people who were raised by good families that got desperate and ended up selling drugs to try to catch up. Let me ask you something. Do you think any girl thinks to herself, you know what? One day I want to go work in a strip club? Or I want to be a prostitute? Do you think any of those women, when they were a little girl, was like, ooh, that's what I dreamed to be? No. It happens because out of an unhealthy relationship with money, they became desperate and they did things that they never thought they would do. If we would just realize that it all belongs to him. Then there's also other people that have too much money. Have you ever noticed that some wealthy people get to a place where they don't depend on God because they can get out of everything with money? They're like, well, I got money. What do I need God? But you know what? I've known a lot of people like that. And here's the funny thing. They're like really nervous people. And they have a hard time sleeping at night. Because if you're over 20 years old, you know something special about money. It likes to run away from you. You know, money is like one of those pets. Have you ever had a pet that it just keeps running away? And you try to build the fence and it just keeps running away. And eventually you're like, is it me? Am I that bad? That this pet keeps running away from me? That's the way money is. Money is always finding a way to just run away. And wealthy people who put their faith in wealth and not in God are always nervous. Oh, what's happening with the economy? Oh man, what? Inflation, all this money that I have is now worth less. What am I going to do? There's all this stuff and they're so nervous. Why? Because they have an unhealthy relationship with money. If they would just get to a place where they go, you know what? It all belongs to him. Wow, I can breathe now. I'm not so nervous anymore. Because it doesn't belong to me, it belongs to him. At the end of the day, you know what a healthy relationship with money looks like? Back in ancient times, if you had saved up some money for the time where you were going to give a sacrifice to the Lord, instead of coming in with a pigeon, which is what the poorer people would be able to bring in, maybe you would be able to save up for a lamb or a goat or maybe even a bull. And you would come into the priest with your family, and the priest would slaughter the bull, and a portion of it would be burnt. That was the burnt offering for Yahweh. Another portion would be given to the priest so that he could feed his family. But then the last portion, they would cook it right there in the temple. And they had a table. And you would go and you would sit there as a family and you would eat a portion of this together as a family in the presence of Yahweh. And that's what a healthy relationship with money looked like back then. What does it look like now? Well, maybe it looks like being able to come to church on a Sunday, to give to the Lord, and then to have enough money to take your family to go get something to eat afterwards. And you know what? There's different stages in life. Some of you guys are in the peanut butter and jelly sandwich picnic after church phase. That's okay, right? And then I think maybe you can graduate when they open up Taco Bell over here. Maybe that'll be the next one, and the next one, and the next one. It's okay. It doesn't matter. But just being able to share a meal with your family after church, and that's what a healthy relationship with God looks like. Or being able to help somebody who's in need, to help them get up on their feet, and you're able to help them financially, but you still have enough money to take your family on vacation. And maybe it's a humble vacation, but it's a vacation. That's what a healthy relationship with money looks like, if we realize that it all belongs to Him. Matthew chapter 6, verse 33 says, but seek first, read it with me, but seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for today. We thank you for this opportunity to think about having a healthy relationship with money, Lord. There's so many people in this life who are stressed out because of money. And Lord, some people, they're not stressed out, but perhaps we should be. Because right around the corner, something's going to happen, and we don't have enough in our savings. We haven't managed our money in a way that we realize that it's all about you and not about us. And so, Lord, I just pray that you would speak to us. Lord, help us to have a healthy relationship with money. So that money doesn't control us, but we control money and we use it to praise you. Lord, we can't really give anything to you because, Lord, you've already given to us everything. The only thing that we can give back to you is a good heart. Lord, I pray for the people in our church. I pray that you would give us good hearts. Accept our worship to you. And it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.